and adventure on the high seas.
I just loved every minute of it.
It has exceeded anything I thought it could ever be.
Titanic is the ultimate dream.
It was supposed to be the underwater trip of a lifetime, but now a group set to see the Titanic and get an up-close sight of the wreck is now in danger of suffering the same fate as the people on the Titanic. There are so many questions that still haven't been answered, but there is speculation that they could have gotten stuck in a fishnet, or experienced a malfunction, or the best-case scenario is that the crew is okay and they just lost service. We won't know all the details until they are found. A submersible known for taking tourists into the deep sea to view the Titanic wreckage has gone missing in the Atlantic Ocean. The U.S. Coast Guard is leading a frantic search working with Canada's Coast Guard and armed forces to search for the 21-foot vessel that lost communication with its control center. The 5-person crew submerged Sunday morning, and the crew of Polar Prince lost contact with them approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes into the vessel's dive. At a press conference on Monday, Rear Admiral John Mauger of the U.S. Coast Guard said, "Search and rescue teams are using aircrafts to scan the ocean, as well as sonar devices to detect possible underwater sounds coming from the submersible." Confirmed that officials are in process of notifying the passengers' families. The missing vessel is owned by OceanGate, a company based in Washington state that offers underwater voyages to explore the remains of the iconic shipwreck from the seafloor. "We are exploring and mobilizing all options to bring the crew back safely," the company said in a statement. Its vessels are equipped with some basic emergency medical supplies and 96 hours of life support, according to the company's website via the Wayback Machine. It takes approximately 2.5 hours to return back to the surface from the seabed, according to OceanGate. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration told NPR that it is also aware of the missing submersible and is closely monitoring the situation. The company's deep-sea tour lasts about 8 days and costs $250,000 per person. From St. John's in Newfoundland, Canada, explorers travel 380 miles offshore and 2.3 miles below the surface. The company gained popularity in recent years for its expeditions to the Titanic, and most recently, the group created the first ever full-sized digital scan of the shipwreck. This is not the first time an OceanGate submersible has gone lost, according to David Pogue, a correspondent for CBS Sunday Morning. Pogue, who traveled on an OceanGate expedition to see the Titanic last summer, recalled that the control room was unable to help the submersible locate the wrecked liner for roughly 3 hours due to technical difficulties. The difference this year is that it seems like they lost contact with the ship. They can't even reach the sub, and that's really scary. The deep sea is difficult to navigate because there is no GPS or radio signals underwater, according to Pogue. The submersible relies on directions sent by the control center.
The sub was exploring the wreckage of the Titanic. The sub went missing in the Atlantic Ocean near Canada.
In a statement, OceanGate, the company responsible for the vessel and the expedition, says, quote, "We are exploring and mobilizing all options to bring the crew back safely. Our entire focus is on the crew members in the submersible and their families."
CBS News correspondent David Pogue joins us now. David has done extensive reporting on these types of submersibles, including a report for CBS Sunday Morning. David, thanks for joining us. It's eerie to watch your piece now and see you down in one of these submersibles. What is it like in there?
It's about the size of a minivan. It houses 5 people. So on that sub at this moment are the pilot, a scientist, and 3 paying passengers who have paid $250,000 each for the opportunity to get on that one-of-a-kind sub and go down 2.5 miles to see the Titanic.
Talk to us, David, about how this submersible is controlled and what are communication systems like on board? Because as we saw in your Sunday Morning piece, there was a point where communication was lost with the surface for something like 2.5 hours.
This is going to sound very janky to a lot of people, but a lot of this submersible is made of off-the-shelf improvised parts. For example, you control it with an Xbox game controller. Some of the ballast are these abandoned lead pipes from construction sites, and the way you ditch them is everybody gets to one side of the sub and they roll off a shelf.
Wow.
But the guy who built this sub and who runs the company, Stockton Rush, told me, yeah, that stuff's all kind of janky, but the important thing, like the capsule that contains the people and the air, that was co-designed with NASA and the University of Washington. The part that keeps you alive is rock solid. So what concerns me is this thing has 7 different ways of returning to the surface. It has different kinds of ballast it can let go. It has an inflatable air bladder. It has propellers. So why isn't it at the surface? There is no radio and no GPS that works underwater. So you really are on your own when you're in this thing. So why haven't they come to the surface? One possibility is they got snagged on something. And another possibility is that there was a leak, which is very unlikely, but if there is a leak, it was over quickly.
I was going to ask you what the issues that can happen on these types of expeditions, and also any idea what might be on board to help with survival, oxygen supply, anything that might keep this crew alive for some period of time, and what sort of time crunch are they under, do you think?
The sub is said to have 96 hours of oxygen, and that takes 3 forms. There are carbon dioxide scrubbers, exactly the same thing you would have in a spacecraft. Then there are these emergency scrubbers. They look like fly strips. They hang from the ceiling and convert CO2 to oxygen. And then if those get exhausted, there are actual scuba oxygen tanks under the floor panels that they can put on. So in all, that's 96 hours. There's a rudimentary toilet, which amounts to little more than a couple Ziploc bags. And of course, they all brought snacks. So there have been times, as you mentioned, last year, they got lost on the bottom for 3 hours during the expedition that I was on. I guess what really worries me is we know that they sometimes lose contact they don't know where they are, but they wouldn't call for the Coast Guard unless that had been going on for some time. So my guess is that this is yesterday's expedition, and they've now been lost for 24 hours.
I, as a human, can't help but ask you how you're feeling, looking back, knowing you were on one of these and seeing what's happening now.
I stayed up all night the night before my dive. I've never done anything that could kill me before, and I was really, really scared. Then I had a conversation with Stockton Rush, the CEO, and he said, you're worried about the wrong things. Like getting back to the surface, running out of air, those we got covered. The things you should be worried about are these really rare things like getting snagged in one of those abandoned fishing nets that are miles long. Seems really unlikely in the North Atlantic, or a leak, which is also really unlikely. So I don't know what to say. It sounds bad if all 7 methods they have of coming to the surface aren't working.
Tourists can take a submersible and do a deep-sea dive to see the wreckage, an opportunity that only became available within the past few years and costs individuals around $250,000. Expeditions include training, gear, and meals, and last for about a week, according to the website of OceanGate Expeditions, the most well-known company that brings tourists to see the Titanic. The expedition began with a 400 nautical mile journey to the wreck site, which is about 900 miles off the coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The submersible began its descent Sunday morning, but lost contact with a crew of Polar Prince, the support ship that transported the vessel to the site, 1 hour and 45 minutes into its descent, officials said. The U.S. Coast Guard was alerted that the submersible was overdue, and it launched searches on the surface of the water and launched an aircraft to start conducting aerial and radar searches. The submersible, named Titan, is 23,000 pounds and made of carbon fiber and titanium, according to the tour operator, OceanGate Expeditions. The 21-foot vessel has life support for up to 96 hours, according to the OceanGate website. Mauger said officials anticipate that there's somewhere between 70 to the full 96 hours of oxygen available on the vessel at this point. The Titanic wreckage, discovered in 1985, sits in 2 parts at the bottom of the ocean, nearly 13,000 feet below the surface. Who is on board? 5 people are in the missing submersible. Businessman Hamish Harding is one of the passengers, according to a social media post by his company, Action Aviation. Typically a pilot, a content expert, and 3 paying passengers are on the expeditions. The cost of joining the 8-day expedition is from $250,000, according to the operator. Mauger said the Coast Guard is notifying the families of the people on the submersible. Search efforts. The effort is incorporating aircraft, sonar buoys, and sonar on the ship that is out there to listen for any sounds that we can detect in the water column, Mauger said. The Polar Prince is also assisting with the search, a co-owner said. The Canadian Armed Forces and the U.S. Coast Guard have deployed aircraft to the remote area of the North Atlantic. What's next? The Coast Guard said its priority is locating the vessel. If crews do find the vessel in the water, then rescue plans will be formed, Mauger said.
On the search for a missing submarine that was touring the wreckage of the Titanic.
5 submariners. We do ask, following his brief statement, we'll be able to take a few questions and answers. We do ask that we give everybody the opportunity to ask one question, and if we have it to go through, we can be able to ask further questions beyond that. We only have time, let's say, for about 10 minutes. So he has a brief statement on here, and at this time, I'd like to introduce Admiral John Mauger.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rear Admiral John Mauger. I'm the commander of the 1st Coast Guard District here in Boston, Massachusetts. And in this case, I am the lead for the Coast Guard search and rescue operations for the overdue submersible out near the wreck of the Titanic. Yesterday afternoon, we were notified by the operator of the submersible vessel that it was overdue, and it had 5 persons on board the submersible. So we're working very closely at this point to make sure that we're doing everything that we can do to locate the submersible and rescue those on board. Our thoughts are with the crew members and the families of those on board the submersible at this time, and we are doing everything that we can do to make sure that we can locate and rescue those on board. So after receiving the call, we reached out to the vessel Polar Prince and began a surface search looking for the submersible. At the same time, we launched a C-130 aircraft to conduct an aerial search, both visual and radar, of the scene. We've subsequently coordinated with the Canadian Coast Guard and Canadian Armed Forces to deploy additional assets to the scene. The Canadians have had a C-130 aircraft searching as well, in addition to also having a P-8 submarine search aircraft deploy as well, and put sonar buoys in the water in attempt to listen. The location of the search is approximately 900 miles east of Cape Cod, in a water depth of roughly 13,000 feet. It is a remote area, and it is a challenge to conduct a search in that remote area, but we are deploying all available assets to make sure that we can locate the craft and rescue the people on board. Going into this evening, we will continue to fly aircraft and move additional vessels into the area. In this remote part of our search and rescue responsibility, oftentimes we rely on commercial operators to be the first vessels on scene. And so we've been in touch with additional commercial vessels that are operating in the area, as well as initiating the movement of additional Canadian Coast Guard assets and U.S. Coast Guard surface asset into the area over the course of the next couple of days. Adding to the complexity of this case is the fact that this was a submersible vessel, And so we need to make sure that we're looking both on the surface for the vessel if it had surfaced back to the water, but it somehow lost communications with the vessel, and that's what the aircraft and the surface search vessel is allowing us to do right now. But we're also having to search in the water column. And we're doing that right now with the use of sonar buoys and sonar on the ship that's out there to listen for any sounds that we can detect in the water column. Over the course of the next couple days, we anticipate adding additional capability to conduct additional search in the water as those commercial assets arrive on scene. Again, our thoughts are with the families and the crew members on board this submersible, and we're working very closely with all U.S. And international partners to provide any capability that we can provide to search for the overdue vessel and rescue the crew members on board. At this point, we'll take questions.
There are reports that the submarine may be trapped in the wreckage of the Titanic. Is this even possible? If that were the case, how much oxygen would these people on board have?
So in terms of locating the overdue submersible, we have to make sure that we're looking on both the surface using aerial and surface vessels, but then expanding into underwater search as well. Right now our capability is limited to sonar buoys and listening for sounds, but you know, we're working very hard to increase the capability. We understand from the operator of the vessel that the vessel was designed with a 96-hour sustainment capability if there was an emergency on board. And so we're using that time, making the best use of every moment of that time to locate the vessel.
Sir, can you talk about who was on board exactly? And is there somebody named Hamish Harding, a British explorer, who can confirm that he's on board as the family has been supposed to have?
At this point, I'm not in a position to confirm the identity of anybody on board the vessel. Out of respect for the families, we're you know, going through the notification process, and more updates will be forthcoming.
Sorry, I may be jumping something here, but it seems like if that vessel is indeed sitting on the bottom, you have a 96-hour window to reach it, that this is a race to get some sort of rescue vehicle down to it. Am I correct about that?
That's absolutely part of the overall planning for this search case. Right now we're focused on locating the vessel, but at the same time, if we find this vessel in the water, then we will have to effect some sort of rescue or coordinating, reaching out to different partners within the U.S. Navy, within the Canadian Armed Forces, and within private industry to understand what underwater rescue capability might be available.
Are there any vessels on the way there that could do that, if they could get down there?
So at this moment, we're focused on the search and understanding the capabilities of the vessels that are deploying to the scene.
And can your sonar measure as deep as 13,000 feet?
So the sonar capabilities within the sonar buoys and within the hull of the commercial vessel that is out there operating on site, those aren't Coast Guard sonars, they are capable of listening to a depth of 13,000 feet, as I understand.
On some of the numbers here, you mentioned that there were 96 hours of oxygen. How much of the 96 hours may be remaining if they are submerged? And also, what is the square mileage of your search right now?
So in terms of the square mileage of the search, I don't have that number right at this moment, but it includes both a surface area that we're looking at and a subsurface area. And so we'll get you the exact number for the square mileage of the search. In terms of the hours, We understood that that was 96 hours of rescue or emergency capability from the operator, and so we anticipate that there's somewhere between 70 to the full 96 hours available at this point.
Do you believe that the sub could be in a location near the Titanic, and if so, what are some of the challenges with sonar and a debris field that the Titanic had produced?
So it's certainly the purpose of the submarine was to, as I understand, the purpose of the submersible was to provide opportunity to visit the wreck site and explore the wreck site. So that's a possibility. Again, right now our focus is getting on as much capability into the area as we can and understanding that full capability of those assets that are being deployed. Our aerial assets that are being deployed have the capability to do both visual and radar searches, and the Canadians' asset had the ability to drop sonar buoys and listen, and so we're using all that information to improve our search capability.
And if it is a case that it's not going to be, what does that look like as far as retrieving and realization challenges, etc.?
So we're working through that right now, but what we're really focused on at the moment is really locating the vessel, which could either be in the surface or subsurface. And so we're bringing in technical expertise to understand both the dynamics of underwater search and underwater rescue operations.
Hi there. So there'll be a lot of families watching this, and we'll be hoping that the loved one will come home. How hopeful are you?
So as search and rescue professionals, you know, we work very, very hard, and our crews take this personally. Our first thoughts are with the crew members and the families of those on board. And so we want to make sure that we have done absolutely everything that we can do to locate their family members and bring them home safe. And so they're first and foremost in our thoughts every moment of this search operation.
Sir, how common are these threats to the Titanic in general, and how dangerous are they even without an emergency taking place?
I don't have any details on how often folks visit the wreck site there at Titanic, nor any specific comments on the dangers involved. Certainly, every time ships go to sea, they encounter hazards and dangers, and so having properly prepared vessels, properly prepared crew members, and making sure that you practice emergency procedures, good practical advice for anybody that goes to sea.
What's happening specifically with the families of those people involved right now? Are you in contact with them? Is there a staging area for them? What's happening?
So at this point, I'm not going to discuss any information about the families and communications with the families, and so we'll provide that with future updates.
Any idea on the number of personnel searching? Is it dozens, hundreds?
So the Coast Guard has two C-130 aircraft. In addition to the command team that's working here, we have two C-130 aircraft deployed. The Canadians have a C-130 aircraft and a P-8 aircraft. We also have access to, and we'll launch this evening, a C-130 aircraft from the New York National Guard to make sure that we have sufficient air assets up there. On the surface, we have the commercial operator that's been on site, and we're bringing additional surface search assets into play, which will also bring in some subsurface search capability.
So
Last question, please.
How many are like company employees? How many are people who are paid to be on?
I understand from the operator that there was one pilot or submersible commander operator on board, and that there were 4 mission specialists on board is the term that the operator uses for them. So five total. You have to ask the operator what that means. What we're focused on is finding those 5 people. Thank you very much for your time.